In 1979, Pat Robertson had recently created the Christian Broadcasting Network.
What is this mac and cheese? Is that a black thing?
It is a black thing, Pat.
And he and his team had a vision. CBN would bring Christianity to Japan through popular Japanese media. Some research quickly led them to conclude the best approach would be evangelism to Japanese children through animation and comic books, Japanese anime, and manga. Christian Broadcasting Network partnered with Tatsunoko animation firm to create an anime series conveying Old Testament Bible stories to Japanese children. This was a big get, as Tatsunoko were creators of the wildly successful Science Ninja Team Gatchamen series. The result was animated parent and child theater. It was very successful, so successful that they decided it needed to come to the United States too, which was not originally part of the plan. And that's how Pat Robertson brought Japanese anime to America as Superbook. Superbook episodes follow a simple formula. We start out in the modern day at the house
just down the street and around the corner.
At the home of Christopher Pieper, a whiny little shithead kid.
But I don't want to do it right now. You treat me like a slave, not a son. Why should I do everything you say? Just when I get to the good part, Father interrupts. I don't see that it's important to learn arithmetic at all. Okay, if I turn into a juvenile delinquent for lack of tender loving care, it's gonna be your fault. Huh? The dress full to show you shouldn't have it, because you're just too fat for it. Is that so?
Other characters here include Chris's father, who's an archaeologist or something, his mother,
no cake for you. You don't deserve any.
His girlfriend Joy, and Chris's very cute dog Ruffles. After an opening vignette that usually has some vague connection to the moral of the episode,
Ruffles got trapped in a tornado. What?
Chris and Joy wind up in Chris's room where Superbook, a magical illustrated copy of the Bible, introduces a Bible story to the two of them before shining a bright light in their faces and sending them into the story along with Chris's toy robot Gizmo. Once in the Bible story, Gizmo gains sentience, and the three of them interact with various biblical characters and get to experience a Bible story. Afterward, they wake up back in Chris's room, and usually there's some conclusion to the modern-day story. As far as I know, Chris's parents never ask why Chris and Joy keep napping together alone in Chris's room. The animation is pretty consistent with other early Japanese anime. The English voice acting is pretty bad.
Whatever you say, Joshua, we know you wouldn't lie to us. If you say we must capture 10 Jerichos, we would say...
And it does a lot of that thing where instead of animation, you just have this single picture that the camera pans around. The first season got 26 episodes telling many of the most famous Bible stories like the Garden of Eden, Noah's Ark, and the Christmas story, as well as some more obscure ones like the story of Queen Esther, of Nehemiah, and the time Gideon led the Israelites in killing just a whole mess of Midianites. Every story has some sort of moral, but they rarely have lessons like you should tell the truth, or you should be charitable, or anything like that. These aren't fables meant to encourage good behavior. They are recruitment tools. The morals tend to be about how you should obey God and not question God, and that no matter what happens, stay the course with God and everything will be okay in the end.
Captain, did you hear Jonah? He disobeyed God's command.
Mm-hmm. God is punishing us because you disobeyed him, Jonah.
Conversely, when Superbook wants to present something as bad, it doesn't suggest that it hurts other people or anything like that. Rather, it puts selfish or worldly desires over God. The word it uses is wicked.
Your sin and wickedness and constant wrongdoing has become a stench that reaches up to heaven. Why, the people are so full of wickedness there, it's like walking into a snake pit full of vipers.
And wickedness can be seen in the Noah's Ark episode.
Here's for the great. Greats are great.
I can dance, I can sing, I'm the greatest living thing.
In the Jonah episode.
I've never seen people drunk in the daytime.
And in this drunk guard in Jericho, who we'll come back to soon. Animated parent and child theater was very successful. It literally made the Bible a bestseller in Japan for a while.
Introduced that whole culture to Bible stories that they hadn't heard. But in terms of the success rate, the Bible became a best-selling book in Japan during that whole campaign.
And as successful media tends to do, this led to sequels and spin-offs. And like most sequels and spin-offs, they largely did not live up to the original. First, a follow-up series in Japan called The Flying House tried to serve as a sort of spiritual successor to Superbook. And from what I can tell, it's very similar to Superbook. Follows another young boy, young girl, and a robot as they travel through time and experience various Bible stories, though this time the focus is the New Testament. After The Flying House, Superbook did get a second season. The second season is a little different. It introduces Christopher's cousin Yuri. In the first episode, Ruffles gets sucked into Superbook, and Yuri and Gizmo follow after her and have to chase her through Bible stories. So them looking for the dog becomes a sort of comic relief B-plot to various events from the Old Testament.
And so the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah with brimstone and fire. The sinners were punished for their wickedness. Lot and his daughters escaped. But what about our friends Yuri and the Crusader robot Gizmo? They were last seen heading for Sodom to look for hot dogs.
So that's what Superbook is on the surface, but let's go a little deeper. Let's look at one episode in more detail to see what it says about what Superbook does. They're all pretty formulaic, so let's just look at the first episode I rewatched when I was reminded of Superbook recently. The story of Joshua and the walls of Jericho, as told through Season 1, Episode 9, Those Amazing Trumpets. We start with Chris yelling at his adorable dog because it doesn't want to jump over a bar. To show Ruffles how it's done, Chris tries to jump over the bar himself and falls, disappointing his father.
I'm surprised you had no better physical coordination.
Sorry.
When this makes him depressed, Joy tells him that his lack of confidence is unattractive.
Now, Christopher Peeper, you've got to have more confidence in yourself if you expect me to marry you.
Huh? Expect what?
Then Superbook opens up, tells them what a shofar is, and whisks them away. They wake up in the desert and quickly come across the Israelites armed with spears and listening to a rousing speech by Joshua, who tells them they must capture Jericho and take the promised land. Some soldiers notice the kids and, concluding that they are spies, take them to Joshua. The kids tell Joshua they're not spies, and so Joshua decides they're not spies and will be their special guests. Joshua then says they can't attack Jericho because it's well fortified, so they need to send spies in to advise on how to proceed. Some child volunteers, and so does this hippie-looking dude. The spies scale the walls of Jericho like Spider-Man and narrowly avoid being seen when a guard gets distracted by a bunny rabbit. Once inside Jericho, they see a guard guzzling wine, who then harasses a random woman and steals her basket. The spies help up the woman and escort her home. The lady, who we learned is named Rahab, wakes up at home with the spies and her family. They have this exchange.
Thank you for helping my daughter, but I really must ask, is the rumor I've heard about you Israelites planning to capture Jericho true?
The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob promised us this land many years ago. Now is the time of fulfillment.
And I can promise you that all those who believe in our God will be safe and will live in peace.
That's possible?
Mm-hmm.
Father, of course it's possible. Anything would be better than those soldiers who abuse us.
2 of those guards break in to search the house, but the spies are hidden. After the guards leave, Rahab has the spies leave by her window. The spies tell Rahab her family will be safe if she ties a red rope by their window. The spies return to the camp, having gathered no information at all, but everyone treats the mission as successful anyway. That night, God tells Joshua how to get across the river. The next day, the priests take the Ark of the Covenant into the river, which then parts for the Israelites to cross.
Doesn't this remind you of that time with Moses?
God can do a repeat performance if he wants to.
Next, the Israelites are outside Jericho. Joshua prays and then tells the Israelites to march around the walls and blow horns. Everyone's on board, and they do it. After 6 days, they let out a big shout and the walls of Jericho collapse. A battle ensues. The kids go with one of the spies to protect Rahab's family. We then get Superbook's closing narration, and the episode ends. So, I watched this, and I had some questions. What was the point of the spies? Who was occupying Jericho?
Anything would be better than those soldiers who abuse us.
What happened to the others there besides Rahab and her family?
And I can promise you that all those who believe in our God will be safe and will live in peace.
I didn't remember much of the story of the walls of Jericho except this one song that I remembered from Sunday school.
You can't win a battle with the horn. Oh, silly Joshua.
So I looked it up, and the episode basically covers the events of the book of Joshua, chapters 2 through 6. Here's how it goes in the Bible. So the first half of that episode consists of about 5 sentences at the beginning of chapter 2. Joshua sends 2 spies to Jericho. They go into the house of a person the King James Version of the Bible refers to as a harlot named Rahab. The king of Jericho finds out they're there and sends some guards to find them. They don't find them, so the guards try to chase them on the road, but Rahab has hidden them on the roof. Rahab tells them that the people of Jericho know about how God delivered the Israelites out of Egypt, and so they are terrified because clearly God will give them whatever they want, including Jericho. And she says, I just saved your lives, so spare me and my family when you take Jericho. And they agree. The spies tell Rahab to do the red rope thing, then they escape through her window. The spies return to Joshua and tell him that the people of Jericho are scared of them, so this should be easy. They do the parting the River Jordan thing, but it's way more elaborate and takes up 2 whole chapters. Then there's a lengthy passage about circumcision. Eventually they get to Jericho and God tells Joshua about the trumpets thing. They do the trumpets, the walls fall, and then they murder every single man, woman, child, and animal in Jericho and take all of its silver and gold. Rahab the harlot and her family are the only ones spared. Yeah, so the story of Jericho is one of the smallish number of times God has the Israelites commit actual genocide. Also, the remains of Jericho are cursed forever. It's grim. This episode does a pretty good job showing the challenge the creators of Superbook had.
The main difficulty was how to introduce 2 kids and a robot into a Bible story.
The Old Testament has some cool stuff in it, and trumpets magically blasting away walls is undeniably cool, but the Old Testament is also dark as shit, and the writers had to take a story involving sex work, circumcision, and genocide and turn it into children's television. So they removed the circumcision stuff, along with any suggestion that Rahab had any particular profession, added in some completely invented stuff about how bad the Jericho authorities were to make the invasion seem somehow justified, and then padded it with some irrelevant subplots. These changes go beyond making dark material appropriate for kids, though. The writers and editors needed to make something that would resonate with a modern audience, and the original Bible story just doesn't. I'm not a Bible scholar, but as far as I can tell, the message of the Bible story of Jericho seems to just be that the Israelites were chosen by God and given the land of Canaan. The circumcision stuff is there to show us a recommitment of the covenant between Israel and God. The genocide isn't because the residents of Jericho were bad, but because they were Canaanites who needed to be wiped clean so the Israelites could take the land. Jericho is the first city in Canaan they take, and the whole thing about walls and trumpets is a show of force. But none of that is going to help Japanese children find Jesus, so they make stuff up. The lesson of this Superbook episode is quite different from the takeaways of the book of Joshua. It isn't totally clear, but the lesson seems to be that with God you can accomplish anything, even if it seems impossible.
He just keeps right on praying.
Look at the water. Those walls seem awfully big.
Just remember, my friend, don't be impatient.
But surely you must have a battle plan, don't you?
Surrender to God.
Now, that is a message that you can win converts with.
The Word of God stands on its own, and when presented in an appropriate and appealing way, it had power.
That's probably why my own memory of the story of Joshua blasting away the walls of Jericho always included some element of the people of Jericho telling Joshua he was crazy and laughing at him.
What are those idiots trying to do, serenade us?
I'll bet they want us to come out and dance with them.
Fat chance.
That's why the song has Jericho calling him silly.
You can't win a battle with the horn.
That's all necessary to get across the modern lesson, even if it is directly contradicted by the Bible itself. Remember, according to the Bible, the people of Jericho very much believed, correctly, that Joshua would destroy them, and they were terrified. This kind of strikes me as emblematic of how many modern Christians experience the Bible more generally. They call it the Word of God and claim to live by it, but the things they know from it are likely to be cherry-picked, with some parts exaggerated, other parts ignored, and probably a good chunk just invented. That's how we end up with clickbait listicles with headlines like 5 things you won't believe aren't in the Bible, 11 things everyone thinks are in the Bible but aren't, and 67 surprising things not found in the Bible. The Bible, to modern audiences, is not just the stories from Genesis to Revelations. It's also the filter of children's songs, Sunday school lessons, and stuff like Superbook, through which those stories have been altered beyond recognition in order to keep them relevant to attract and retain new converts. So Superbook is still around. It got a modern reboot. The modern Superbook, which started airing in 2011 and is still going 5 seasons later, is a computer-animated show set in the future and starring Chris Quantum, Joy, and Gizmo going on adventures with the help of Superbook, which is now a sort of holographic disc. They experience many of the same events in the original Superbook.
Rahab, you seem to know everybody in Jericho.
It's missing all the anime weirdness and is much more straightforward Western Christian propaganda.
Why is the Jesus from Superbook white? That's a tough one indeed.
So I tried watching it, but it is really boring, and it suffers from a serious lack of ruffles.